The Josef Fritzl case, the father who imprisoned his daughter for 24 years. There are crimes that shake us, crimes that disturb our sense of safety, and then there are crimes that fundamentally challenge what we believe human beings are capable of. The case of Josef Fritzl falls into that last category. It's a story that emerged from a quiet Austrian town in the spring of 2008, and when it did, it sent shockwaves around the world. This is not just a story about imprisonment. It's a story about control, about denial, about systemic failures, and about the terrifying reality that the most monstrous acts can hide in the most ordinary places. This is the story of a father who turned his home into a prison, a man who spent years meticulously planning the unthinkable, and a daughter who endured 24 years of unimaginable darkness. Let's begin at the beginning. Amstetten is a small town in Lower Austria, about 120 kilometers west of Vienna. In the 1980s, it was the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, where people went about their daily routines with a sense of predictability and order. The Cold War still cast its shadow across Europe, and Austria, balanced precariously on the edge of the Iron Curtain, lived with a particular kind of vigilance. Homes in this region often featured reinforced basements, bunker-like cellars with thick concrete walls and heavy steel doors. These weren't unusual, they were encouraged. The threat of nuclear war felt real, and the government offered subsidies for families who wanted to build these shelters beneath their homes. This context is important, because when Josef Fritzl applied for a permit in 1978 to expand the cellar beneath his home at number 40 Ibstrasse, no one questioned it. No one thought it strange. It was practical, it was responsible, and it gave him exactly what he needed: time, space, and the perfect cover. Josef Fritzl was born on April 9, 1935, in Amstetten. His childhood, by his own account, was difficult. His mother, Maria, was 42 when she had him, and according to Fritzl, she never wanted him. She was cold, distant, and physically abusive. His father, Josef Sr., was a severe alcoholic who abandoned the family when Josef was just 4 years old. The father later fought in the Wehrmacht during World War II and was killed in action in 1944. His name appears on a memorial plaque in Amstetten. Fritzl grew up as an only child, raised solely by his working mother. He later described a household ruled by fear and humiliation. He claimed his mother regularly subjected him to physical and emotional abuse throughout his childhood. He said he was beaten frequently. At the age of 12, he told his mother he would no longer tolerate it, that he would defend himself. From that point on, he said, he became Satan personified for her. This was the narrative Fritzl would present to the world decades later, a story designed to elicit sympathy, or at least understanding. But the truth is more complex. Psychological evaluations would later reveal a man with profound personality disorders, someone who exhibited traits of both antisocial and narcissistic personality disorder. He was manipulative, calculating, and entirely lacking in empathy. One psychiatrist would later say that Fritzl felt he was born to rape, that he was aware of his evil side, but only loosely kept it under control. In 1956, at the age of 21, Josef Fritzl married 17-year-old Rosemary. They would have 7 children together, including a daughter named Elizabeth, born on April 6, 1966. To the outside world, Fritzl appeared respectable. He worked as an electrical engineer, a technical equipment salesman who traveled throughout Austria. He was polite, hard-working, financially successful. He owned rental properties, a guest house, and managed an inn near Lake Mondsee. He was described as a family man, affectionate with his grandchildren, honest and dependable at work. But there was another side to Josef Fritzl, a darker side that few ever saw. In 1967, when Elizabeth was just 1 year old, Fritzl broke into the home of a 24-year-old nurse in Linz while her husband was away. He held a knife to her throat and raped her, threatening to kill her if she screamed. He was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 18 months in prison. He served 12 months. Under Austrian law, the conviction was expunged from his criminal record after 15 years, which meant that decades later, when he applied to adopt children, the local social service authorities never discovered his violent past. This is the man who would one day imprison his own daughter, a man who had already proven himself capable of monstrous acts. a man who learned, perhaps during that year in prison, that getting away with these crimes required patience, diligence, long-term planning. And that's exactly what he did. Elizabeth Fritzl was an ordinary girl growing up in a home that was anything but ordinary. She was the fourth of 7 children, and from an early age she was singled out by her father. Not for affection, for something far more sinister. According to police records and Elizabeth's own testimony, Josef Fritzl began sexually abusing her when she was 11 years old. 11. A child who should have been playing with friends, going to school, discovering the world. Instead, she was being violated by the person who was supposed to protect her. As the abuse continued, Elizabeth became withdrawn. She was already an outsider at school, and now she retreated further into herself. Her best friend, Krista Waldrich, later recalled that Elizabeth always had to be home half an hour after school finished. She was never allowed to have friends visit. The only explanation she ever gave was that her father was very strict. Krista said she never saw him, but he was always there between them, like an invisible presence she could always feel. Josef Fritzl ruled his household with an iron fist. He was a domestic tyrant, the kind of figure not uncommon in provincial Austria among men of that generation. His wife, Rosemary, and his children lived under his control. When he said something was black, it was black, even if it was 10 times white. He tolerated no dissent. He created a culture of fear. At 15, Elizabeth entered a training program as a waitress at a highway rest stop near Strengberg in eastern Austria. For the first time in her life, she felt free. She slept in a dormitory with other girls, away from her father, away from his greed and his lasciviousness. It must have felt like she could finally breathe. On January 28, 1983, Elizabeth ran away from home. She went to Vienna with another girl from work and lived in hiding in the city's 20th district. But after 3 weeks, the police found her and returned her to her parents. This failed escape attempt would serve a dual purpose for Josef Fritzl. It provided him with a narrative, a story he could later use to explain her disappearance. Now she was a runaway, a troubled child, a rascal who didn't follow the rules. Who would really care where she had gone? And it gave him an excuse to punish her. Elizabeth decided to endure, to stick it out until her training program was finished. She completed it in late summer of 1984. She had a job prospect in the city of Linz. Freedom was finally within reach, but Josef Fritzl had other plans. Josef Fritzl began planning the imprisonment of his daughter years before he actually carried it out. Police investigations would later reveal that he applied for permits to expand his apartment complex as early as 1978. Elizabeth was 12 years old. This was not built from one day to the next, as Police Colonel Franz Polzer would later say. Fritzl worked on the Cellar for 5 years, slowly, methodically, constructing what would become a soundproof dungeon beneath his home. The original building at number 40 Eibstrasse had been constructed in 1890. Fritzl's expansions were cleverly disguised as renovations and improvements. No one questioned them. Why would they? He was simply building a bunker, something the government actively encouraged. He was being a responsible homeowner, preparing his family for the worst. The cellar Fritzl created was a warren of narrow corridors and low-ceilinged rooms. To reach the hidden section, you had to pass through 5 locked doors just to get to the extension. Then there were 3 more doors, heavy metal and electronically operated, each requiring a secret numeric code that only Fritzl knew. The final door weighed about 500 kilograms, half a ton. Inside, he installed electricity, a toilet, a sink, a stove, a refrigerator, and a bed. He made it soundproof. He equipped it with everything necessary to sustain life, but nothing to make life bearable. The space was originally 35 square meters. Later, after repeated requests from Elizabeth, he would force her and her children to dig with their hands, expanding it to 55 square meters over years of hard labor. By August of 1984, everything was ready. And that's when he struck. Elizabeth Fritzl was 18 years old. She had just finished her training. She had plans. She had hope. On the evening of August 28, 1984, her father asked her for a favor. He needed help carrying a door into the basement. It was a simple request, the kind of thing a daughter would do for her father without a second thought. She followed him down, and she would not see the sky again for 24 years. Once they were in the basement, according to Elizabeth's testimony, Josef Fritzl held a towel soaked in ether over her face until she lost consciousness. When she woke up, she was handcuffed to a column. He raped her. Then he left her there for 2 days. Later, he attached her to a leash so she could reach the bathroom. He told her that if she tried to escape, she would be gassed. He told her the door was electrified and she would die if she touched it. These were lies investigators would later confirm, but Elizabeth had no way of knowing that. Above ground, Josef Fritzl told everyone that Elizabeth had run away again. To prove it, he produced letters. Letters he had forced Elizabeth to write, begging her parents not to look for her. He mailed them from different locations in Austria so they would bear distant postmarks. The letters claimed she was tired of her family, that she had joined a friend, that no one should try to look for her, or she would flee the country. The police investigated, but they believed the letters. Why wouldn't they? This girl had run away before. This girl was troubled. And her father, Josef Fritzl, seemed genuinely concerned. The case was closed, and Elizabeth disappeared from the world. Try to imagine it. A space so small you can barely stretch your arms. No windows, no sunlight, no fresh air. The walls damp and mouldy, the ceiling so low you can barely stand upright, the air thick, stale, oppressive. The only light comes from dim bulbs controlled by your captor. The only sound is your own breathing and his footsteps when he comes. And he comes almost every day. For the first 5 years, Elizabeth was alone. Just her and her father. He would descend into the cellar, bringing food, supplies, and his demands. He raped her repeatedly. Thousands of times over the years. More than 3,000 times, prosecutors would later estimate, sometimes multiple times in a single visit, sometimes in front of her children to humiliate her further. In November 1986, Elizabeth suffered a miscarriage in the 10th week of pregnancy. On August 30th, 1988, she gave birth to her first child, a daughter named Kerstin. There was no doctor, no medical care, just Elizabeth, alone in agony, delivering her own child in that fetid darkness. Kerstin survived, and she would spend the next 19 years of her life in that cellar, never once seeing the sun. On February 1st, 1990, Elizabeth gave birth to a son, Stefan. He too would remain underground for 18 years. But Josef Fritzl had a different plan for the next 3 children. On August 29, 1992, Elizabeth gave birth to a daughter named Lisa. When Lisa was 9 months old, in May 1993, Fritzl took her upstairs. He placed her in a cardboard box outside the family home with a note, allegedly from Elizabeth, asking that the child be looked after because she could not care for her. On February 26, 1994, another daughter, Monica, was born. In December, when Monica was 10 months old, Fritzl staged the same scenario. This time, he placed the baby in a pushchair outside the entrance of the house. Shortly afterward, Rosemary received a phone call. The voice sounded like Elizabeth, but it was likely a recording Fritzl had made. The caller asked Rosemary to take care of the child. When Rosemary reported the incident to police, she expressed astonishment that Elizabeth knew their new, unlisted phone number. On April 28, 1996, Elizabeth gave birth to twin boys, Michael and Alexander. Michael died after less than 3 days. He had difficulty breathing from the moment he was born. With proper medical care, he almost certainly would have survived. But Fritzl refused to help. He watched the infant struggle. And then he removed the tiny body and burned it in the incinerator in his home. Prosecutors would later charge him with murder by neglect. The surviving twin, Alexander, was taken upstairs at 15 months old and discovered in circumstances similar to his 2 sisters. On December 16, 2002, Elizabeth gave birth to her 7th child, a son named Felix. According to Fritzl, he kept Felix in the cellar with Elizabeth and her 2 eldest children because his wife could not look after another child. So now there were 4 people living in that underground prison: Elizabeth, Kerstin, Stefan, and Felix. 4 people in 55 square meters of damp, windowless hell. They had a small television that Fritzl eventually allowed them. That was their only connection to the outside world. They saw images of mountains, oceans, cities, freedom. Things they would never experience. Elizabeth did everything she could to protect her children. She taught Kerstin and Stefan to read and write. She tried to educate them through the television and her limited memories of the world above. She instilled hope in them, even when she had none herself. She created a mantra to keep herself sane, a rhythm to survive the nightmare. Light out. Rape. Light on. Mold. Rape. In front of the children. Uncertainty. Birth. Death. Rape. This was her life, for 24 years. While Elizabeth and 3 of her children suffered in unimaginable conditions below, Josef Fritzl continued his life above. He was a grandfather now, raising 3 of his own grandchildren, children he had fathered through rape. He played with them. He took them to school. He attended family gatherings. Rosemary, his wife, cared for the 3 children who had mysteriously appeared on their doorstep. She believed the story about Elizabeth joining a cult. She believed her daughter had abandoned these children, and Josef Fritzl reinforced that belief at every opportunity. Neighbors saw nothing unusual. The community saw a respectable, if somewhat stern, family man. Fritzl managed several properties. He ran businesses. He was financially successful. Yes, he was strict, perhaps domineering, but nothing about him screamed danger. Nothing suggested the horror happening beneath his feet. The cellar of his house belonged to him, and him alone. It was his kingdom, as he would later tell Austrian prosecutors. No one dared to enter his realm or even ask him what he was doing there. His wife, his children, his lodgers, they all knew better than to question him. And so the years passed, one after another, 8,516 days, until April 19, 2008. Kerstin Fritzl was 19 years old. She had spent her entire life in the cellar. She had never seen a cloud, never felt rain on her skin, never breathed fresh air. And now she was dying. She had developed a severe infection, multiple organ failure. Her teeth were rotting from malnutrition, her body was shutting down. Even Josef Fritzl, cold and calculating as he was, could see that if she died, he would be guilty of murder. And if she died, he would have to keep Elizabeth and the other 2 children captive forever. On April 19th, he brought Kerstin to the hospital in Amstetten. He told the staff that she was his granddaughter, that he had found her in front of his door, left there by his daughter who had disappeared decades ago to join a sect. Doctors were baffled. They couldn't diagnose her condition. They had no medical history. They didn't even know who she really was. On April 21st, police issued an appeal. On April 25th, hospital officials made a televised appeal, urging Kerstin's mother to come to the clinic and provide a medical history. Elizabeth saw the appeal on the television in her cell. She begged Fritzl to take her to the hospital. She wanted to help her daughter. And perhaps, after so many years, Fritzl made a miscalculation. Perhaps he thought he could still control the situation. Perhaps he believed his story would hold. On April 26th, he released Elizabeth, Stefan, and Felix from the cellar and brought them upstairs. He told his wife that Elizabeth had decided to come home after a 24-year absence. That evening, Fritzl took Elizabeth to the hospital. Shortly afterward, during a visit, an anonymous tipster called the police with suspicions. The statements given by Fritzl and Elizabeth seemed implausible. Police arrived. They questioned both of them, and they assured Elizabeth that she would be protected if she told her story. Josef Fritzl was arrested. On April 28, 2008, Josef Fritzl confessed. He admitted to imprisoning his daughter in 1984. He admitted to repeatedly raping her. He admitted to fathering 7 children with her, and he admitted to incinerating the body of the infant who died. On April 29th, DNA tests confirmed that Fritzl was the biological father of Elizabeth's 6 surviving children. The world reacted with shock and disbelief. Austria, a nation still reeling from the Natascha Kampusch case just 2 years earlier, now faced another nightmare. How could this happen? How did no one see? How did a man keep his daughter and grandchildren imprisoned for nearly a quarter of a century without anyone noticing? Police gave Fritzl the combination to open the electronic lock on the cellar door. When investigators descended into that darkness, they were overwhelmed. Forensic staff struggled to breathe in the oppressive atmosphere. The stench of mold was unbearable. The space was so cramped, so low, so utterly devoid of humanity. One policeman said afterward, "There are things you just don't want to see." Prosecutors began building their case. The evidence was overwhelming. Elizabeth's videotaped testimony, the physical space itself, the DNA results, the letters Fritzl had forced her to write, the web of lies he had spun for decades. On November 13, 2008, Fritzl was formally charged. Murder by neglect for the infant Michael's death. Rape, incest, kidnapping, false imprisonment, slavery, enslavement. He faced between 10 years and life imprisonment. On March 16, 2009, the trial of Josef Fritzl began in the city of St. Pölten, presided over by Judge Andrea Humer. The small Baroque town, normally quiet and provincial, was suddenly thrust into the international spotlight. Hundreds of journalists descended on the courthouse. A large marquee, reminiscent of a beer tent, was erected outside to accommodate the press. Sausage stands and a mobile sweet shop flanked the entrance. Protesters with blood-smeared dolls mingled with camera crews. One man in a lab coat, adorned with a dozen baby dolls and fake blood dripping from his mouth, led a young woman in a party dress silently through the crowd as music by Wagner blared in the background. Inside the courtroom, Josef Fritzl entered, attempting to hide his face behind a blue folder, which he was entitled to do under Austrian law. He wore a mismatched suit and a blue shirt. His voice was weak and soft as he gave the judge his name and other personal details. Initially, he pleaded guilty to incest and forced imprisonment, but not guilty to murder and enslavement, and only partially guilty to rape and coercion. His defense attorney, Rudolf Meyer, appealed to the jury to be objective and not be swayed by emotions. He insisted Fritzl was not a monster, stating that he had brought a Christmas tree down to his captives in the cellar during the holiday season. But Chief Prosecutor Christiane Burkheiser pressed for life imprisonment in an institution for the criminally insane. She demonstrated for jurors the low height of the ceiling in the cellar dungeon by making a mark on the courtroom door at 174 centimeters. She described the cellar as damp and moldy, passing around a box of musty objects taken from the cellar. The odor made jurors flinch. On the first day of testimony, jurors watched 11 hours of videotaped testimony recorded by Elizabeth in sessions with police and psychologists in July 2008. The tape was so harrowing that the 8 jurors did not watch more than 2 hours at a time. 4 replacement jurors were on standby in case any of the regular jurors could not bear to hear any more of the evidence. Besides the video testimony, Elizabeth's older brother Harold testified that he was physically abused by Fritzl as a child. Then something unexpected happened. On the second day of the trial, Elizabeth attended in person. She sat in the visitors' gallery in disguise while her video testimony was aired. Fritzl's attorney later confirmed that she had been there. Josef Fritzl recognized that Elizabeth was in court, and from that point on, you could see him going pale and breaking down, Meyer said. It was a meeting of eyes that changed his mind. On March 18th, Fritzl changed his plea. He pleaded guilty to all charges. He stood before the court and said, "I declare myself guilty to the charges in the indictment." He referred at one point to his sick behavior. He expressed regret over the infant's death. "I don't know why I didn't help," he said. "I just overlooked it. I thought the little one would survive. I should have recognized that the baby was doing poorly." Psychiatrist Adelheid Kastner testified that Fritzl had a serious personality disorder and would pose a threat if freed. She said Fritzl had a need to control people and should serve out his sentence at a psychiatric facility. She said he had an ability to block out his crimes but knew what he was doing was wrong. He acknowledged he had a guilty conscience when he went to bed at night and when he woke up in the morning. Fritzl felt he was born to rape, Kastner told the court. On the surface, everything functions smoothly. But deep down, his unfulfilled needs are simmering. He is aware, he says so himself, that he has an evil side. He is aware that he was born to rape. He has that partly under control, but as soon as he loosens his grip, everything erupts out. Kastner said she had asked why he had chosen Elizabeth out of his 7 legitimate children as his victim. He replied, "Because she was most like me. She was as stubborn as me, as strong as me. The stronger your opponent, the bigger the victory. That may very well have been the reason." On March 19, 2009, the jury delivered its verdict. Guilty on all counts. Josef Fritzl was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 15 years. He said that he accepted the sentence and would not appeal. he was remanded to Kerstin Abbey, a former monastery in Upper Austria that had been converted into a prison in a special section for the criminally insane. Chief Prosecutor Berkheiser dismissed Fritzl's display of remorse as insincere. "Don't believe him," she said. "He's revealed his true nature by attempting to take advantage of people's naivety." The sentence brought a sense of justice, though it could never heal the deep wounds inflicted upon Elizabeth and her children. Elizabeth Fritzl and her 6 surviving children were taken into care immediately after her rescue. They were moved to the neuropsychiatric clinic in Amstetten, where they were given their own private living quarters, separate from other patients. A team of medical doctors and psychiatrists began the long process of counseling them, helping them come to terms with their unimaginable ordeal. The reunion between Elizabeth and her mother Rosemarie was initially smooth, astonishing hospital staff with the ease with which they got along. The 3 children who had lived upstairs, Lisa, Monica, and Alexander, met their siblings who had lived in the cellar for the first time. They talked, they bonded, they made breakfast together, they made their beds. "It was truly remarkable to see them bonding and growing together," said Dr. Berthold Keplinger, director of the clinic. Hospital staff built a windowless chamber for the children who had lived underground, so they had a place to retreat to when coping with their new life became too much for them. Kerstin, who had been in a medically induced coma, was awakened on June 1st. On that morning, Dr. Albert Reiter greeted her. "Hello, Kerstin," he said. And she said, "Hello." It marked the beginning of a new life, the end of a long time of suffering. Kerstin recovered enough to be reunited with her family. She expressed wishes to see the ocean, to go to a Robbie Williams concert. When doctors played his music in her hospital room, she moved so much to the music they had to quiet her down. That's when they became confident she could become fully healthy and develop normally. But the trauma ran deep. Stefan and Kerstin suffered anxiety and panic attacks. The children who had been raised upstairs received treatment for anger and resentment. In July 2008, the relationship between Elizabeth and her mother broke down. Elizabeth could not cope with the issue of her mother's passiveness during her upbringing, when her father first abused her when she was only 11 years old. Elizabeth ordered Rosemarie out of the villa where they were living. It would take time, but Elizabeth eventually forgave her mother. The family was given new identities and moved to a secret location, a villa set up by authorities to protect them from the media and the public eye. They receive ongoing therapy to this day. Elizabeth is reportedly writing a book based on diaries she kept during her captivity, which will maintain her anonymity while providing an income for her family. The physical toll was immense. Elizabeth, at 42 years old, looked more like the sister of her 67-year-old mother than her daughter. Years of captivity, malnutrition, and abuse had aged her far beyond her years. Her teeth were horrifically decayed. The children who lived in the cellar had pale, ghostly skin, weak muscles, pliable bones from lack of sunlight and exercise. Their eyes were overly sensitive to strong light. Their spatial orientation was damaged from life in narrow corridors with low ceilings. But slowly, with care and time, they began to heal. Fresh air, daylight, and good food made them feel better. They learned to navigate the world above ground, a world they had only seen on television. The Fritzl case forced Austria to confront uncomfortable questions about itself. How could this happen? Why didn't anyone notice? What failures in the system allowed a man to imprison and rape his daughter for nearly a quarter of a century? Some commentators argued that Austria's innately conservative and patriarchal society meant that figures like Fritzl were less likely to be challenged by authorities or denounced by those who suspected him. Others drew on Austria's place in World War II, suggesting that the psychological strain of living under the threat of nuclear destruction was to blame. Some pointed to the country's literature, including the bleak work of Nobel Prize winner Elfriede Jelinek, as evidence of a deeper cultural malaise. But others pushed back on these theories. Journalist Hella Pick, an Anglo-Austrian, described such theories as totally over the top. She said Austria was the most gossipy country she knew, so the theories about a culture of silence were wide of the mark. The truth is likely more mundane and more universal. Josef Fritzl was able to maintain his double life because people didn't want to see. Neighbors, acquaintances, Even family members failed to piece together the incongruent aspects of his behavior. His controlling nature, Elizabeth's disappearance, the mysterious appearance of 3 babies on his doorstep. Each individual piece might have seemed odd, but not alarming. And Fritzl was skilled at creating plausible explanations, at instilling fear, at maintaining control. There were systemic failures too. Fritzl had a criminal record for rape, but it had been expunged. When he applied to adopt children, social services never discovered his violent past. When Elizabeth was reported missing, the investigation was cursory at best. The letters Fritzl produced were accepted at face value. No one dug deeper. The case also highlighted the importance of community vigilance. Neighbors and community members are often the first line of defense in recognizing signs of domestic abuse and hidden violence. But there's a reluctance to intervene in private family matters, a cultural tendency to mind one's own business. And Josef Fritzl exploited that tendency masterfully. In the wake of the trial, Austrian Chancellor Alfred Gusenbauer said he planned to launch a foreign public image campaign for his country, in light of the abominable events. But image campaigns don't address root causes. What Austria and the world needed to learn from this case was the importance of questioning, of intervening, of not looking away when something doesn't feel right. What drives a man to do what Josef Fritzl did? How do we make sense of such profound depravity? Psychiatrist Adelheid Kastner spent months evaluating Fritzl, meeting with him alone 6 times before producing her 130-page report. She concluded that he suffered serious personality problems, but was responsible for his actions during the 24 years he raped and abused his daughter. Fritzl exhibited traits of both antisocial and narcissistic personality disorder. He was manipulative, a pathological liar who did not accept responsibility. He lacked empathy, remorse, and guilt, though he showed some remorse when in court, likely as a strategy. He had a sense of entitlement, was arrogant, and had grandiose fantasies. After his arrest, he actually claimed that he was trying to protect Elizabeth from the outside world because she would not obey any rules. He said the sexual activity was consensual. He thought people would believe him. This level of delusion, this ability to reframe his crimes as somehow justified or even noble, speaks to the depths of his narcissism. Fritzl told Kastner that he was born to rape and that he held himself back for a relatively long time. "I could have behaved a lot worse than locking up my daughter," he said. This statement reveals a man who saw his crimes not as aberrations, but as the fulfillment of an innate drive, something he was destined to do. His childhood trauma played a role, but it doesn't excuse his actions. Many people suffer abuse as children and do not become monsters. Fritzl made choices, calculated choices over decades. He planned, he built, he lied, he maintained his double life with meticulous attention to detail. He was sadistic. Causing Elizabeth to suffer brought him satisfaction. He would often rape her in front of the children to create additional humiliation. He would physically attack her and turn off the lights for days at a time to punish her and her children. What made Fritzl particularly dangerous was not just his depravity, but his intelligence and impulse control. Many psychopathic offenders are caught because they give in to impulses. Fritzl was willing to play the long game. He spent years planning before he struck. He was diligent, organized, patient. It's the difference between an offender getting caught after 1 assault or being arrested after 3,000 assaults. Great evil, like great goodness, is a mystery. Both beggar the imagination and exhaust our explanations, leaving us simply in awe of what a human being can do. Josef Fritzl took us to the heart of darkness, to a place where the boundaries of human cruelty seem almost limitless. And yet, as incomprehensible as his actions were, he remains one of us. A human being who made choices. Terrible, unforgivable choices. If Josef Fritzl represents the depths of human depravity, then Elizabeth Fritzl represents the heights of human resilience. For 24 years, she endured conditions that would break most people within days. She was raped thousands of times. She gave birth 7 times without medical care. She watched one of her babies die. She raised her children in a space so small, so dark, so utterly devoid of hope that it's difficult for the human mind to comprehend. And yet, she survived. She not only survived, she protected her children. She taught them to read and write. She tried to educate them through the television and her limited knowledge of the world. She instilled hope in them, even when she had none herself. Social workers and therapists praised her strength in bringing up children in such cramped squalor. Kerstin was so ill from malnutrition that she suffered multiple organ failure, but she survived because her mother fought for her. Stefan learned to read and write in a windowless cell because his mother taught him. Felix, the youngest, knew his mother's love even in the darkest place imaginable. Elizabeth's trauma is etched into her face, her body, her very being. She looks decades older than her actual age. She has complicated medical problems. She will carry the scars of her ordeal for the rest of her life. But she is free, and she is healing. The process is slow, painful, and ongoing. But Elizabeth has shown remarkable strength. She forgave her mother. She reunited with her children. She is building a new life, one day at a time, in a secret location under a new identity. Her story is a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable darkness, the human spirit can endure. That love can survive where hope cannot. That a mother's will to protect her children can be stronger than a monster's will to destroy. There are no easy lessons to draw from a case like this. No simple takeaways, but there are truths we cannot ignore. The first is that evil is real, not abstract, not theoretical, but real and tangible and capable of hiding in the most ordinary places. Josef Fritzl was not a caricature. He was not obviously monstrous. He was a neighbor, a colleague, a family man. And that's what makes cases like this so terrifying. The most dreadful of crimes can happen in the most ordinary of places. The second truth is that we must be vigilant. We must be willing to question, to intervene, to speak up when something doesn't feel right. Domestic abuse thrives in silence. It thrives when people look away, when they mind their own business, when they accept explanations that don't quite add up. Elizabeth Fritzl was hidden in plain sight. There were signs, subtle perhaps, but signs nonetheless. And they were ignored. The third truth is that systems fail. Social services, law enforcement, the justice system, they all failed Elizabeth. Fritzl's prior rape conviction should have been a red flag. Elizabeth's disappearance should have prompted a thorough investigation. The appearance of 3 babies on a doorstep should have raised alarms. But at every turn, the system accepted Fritzl's explanations. It's a reminder that we must continually improve these systems, make them more proactive, more thorough, more willing to dig beneath the surface. The fourth truth is about resilience. Elizabeth's story is not just about victimhood, it's about survival. It's about the strength of the human spirit, the power of a mother's love, the capacity to endure and to heal even after unimaginable trauma. And the final truth is this: we are all capable of both great good and great evil. Josef Fritzl is a human being, not a monster from a nightmare, but a person who made choices. And if a human being is capable of such depravity, then we must acknowledge that potential exists within the species, which means we must guard against it. We must create societies that protect the vulnerable, that challenge authority, that refuse to look away. The Fritzl case revealed the darkest corners of human nature, but it also revealed the light, the strength of a mother who refused to let darkness extinguish her love, the courage of a daughter who finally found her voice, and the hope that even after 24 years in hell, healing is possible. Josef Fritzl is currently serving his life sentence in a special section for the criminally insane at Garston Abbey. He changed his name to one that has not been made public. In recent years, he has applied for transfer to a regular prison, arguing that as an elderly, frail man with dementia, he no longer poses a threat. Courts have gone back and forth on this decision, with some rulings in his favor and others overturning those decisions. As of 2024, he remains in detention, though the possibility of conditional release continues to be debated. Elizabeth Fritzl and her 6 children live under new identities at a secret location in Austria. They continue to receive therapy and support. Elizabeth is reportedly working on a book about her ordeal, though she maintains strict anonymity. Her children are slowly adapting to life in the world above, learning to navigate a society they once only saw on television. Rosemary Fritzl, Josef's wife and Elizabeth's mother, has distanced herself from her husband. She sought and received a divorce, Though the emotional toll of the case weighs heavily on her, she too has largely disappeared from public view. The house at number 40 Ibstrasse in Amstetten, the House of Horrors, still stands. The cellar has been filled in with concrete. The building remains, a quiet monument to unspeakable suffering, a reminder that evil can lurk beneath the most ordinary facades. A final reflection. The case of Josef Fritzl is one of those stories that stays with you. It haunts you, not just because of the horror of what happened, but because of what it reveals about the world we live in, about the capacity for cruelty that exists within humanity, about the systems that fail to protect the vulnerable, about the silence that allows evil to flourish. But it also reveals something else, something harder to articulate, but no less important. It reveals the capacity for endurance, for love, for hope in the darkest of places. Elizabeth Fritzl spent 8,516 days in darkness, and then she emerged into the light. Damaged, yes, scarred beyond measure, but alive, and determined to build a new life for herself and her children. That is the story we must remember. Not just the horror, but the survival. Not just the monster, but the woman who refused to be broken. Because in the end, that is what defines us. Not the evil we are capable of, but the strength we find to resist it, to endure it, to survive it, and to never ever look away when someone needs our help. This has been the story of Josef Fritzl, the father who imprisoned his daughter for 24 years. May we never forget it, and may we never stop fighting to ensure it never happens again.